Hi, this is Dr. Paul Show. I'm Dr. Paul Corona again. I have a really special guest on, Nate Winnakur, and he was introduced to me by a patient of mine. I have a lot of patients in the cannabis industry, and I got referred by a guy to Nate. He says Nate is the guy. Had a lot of great things to say about him. So he said, if you want to know anything about the subject, talk to Nate. And I've learned from him that he teaches at a college, and that he said that there's going to be actually a degree, a AA degree, in cannabis, and that maybe even these things that might go into like even a bachelor's degree potentially.
I mean, that would be amazing, and I think there are other schools that offer that. And thank you for the introduction. My name is Nate Winnakur, and thank you for having me, Doctor.
Thank you.
So in the future of cannabis, I think the idea of a degree is really exciting, but just cannabis education is a huge one. It's an area of cannabis industry, and even the people who are fans of cannabis. It's an area that doesn't get that much attention in my opinion. People just understanding this plant. For instance, people at this point in time, August 2024, are still very much on this track that THC in cannabis equals quality, which is no more true than to say a high ABV in alcohol equals high quality. In fact, that's usually the opposite. When's the last time that somebody took Everclear to a high-end dinner party? It's the same for cannabis. There's much more variation in it than a lot of people give it credit for, due to, I would say, people not knowing this plant that well. And in that variation, you find a whole myriad of different chemical profiles, which includes high THC, mid, lower THC, high CBD strains, and so forth.
Obviously, cannabis has a long history. I'm sure. Is there any mention of it going back like thousands of years? Do you know anything about the ancient history of it and how it was used in the past?
Very first plant that was cultivated for fabric. So that's pretty special. If you think the fact that us and everybody in this room are wearing clothes right now, that started at least in practice with this. And even if that's up for dispute, it could be said to be absolutely one of the very first plants that was cultivated for fabric. You have cannabis, and of course, when you look at something like world history, it ends up being, we have such a bias to it because you tend to, when you're researching something yourself, look for the parts of it that are most interesting to you, And so, I've come across a couple of things. I personally love cannabis, and I want to believe that it's one of the most important plants in history. In that, we have a lot of opportunities to show how it's been a part of various cultures, various elements that we would consider to be positive resistances, and how it was there on the sidelines, a proverbial fly on the wall for so many times in history through population of North America to Napoleon and his wars, to so many other things. So it's really quite interesting. I like the idea of seeing the evolution too of cannabis products. Cannabis products rendered cannabis rendered into a product has been a thing for, as near as I can recall, about 130 years now. That's pretty special.
So that's 103. So we're talking like late 1800s then. So I remember, I don't know if this is a myth or not, but the Coca-Cola, the early stages was actually cocaine inside.
That's what I hear. I'm not. I'm too young to be able to remember the glory of those days there. But I hear stories now. What there was for cannabis. And you'll see various products kind of peppered across the timeline from the late 1800s till now. But what there originally were drinks. If you go back even a little bit older to when it was starting to be utilized in medicine, more of a Western medicine kind of approach, where, if I remember the guy's name, it was William O'Shaughnessy. Who had a chance to really study it, understand it, find various expressions of it, And from what I recall on that topic, there were it was largely extracted and ethanol extracted form. Almost think about how, and when I say ethanol, alcohol extraction.
Right.
So think about almost vanilla extract. You know, if you want vanilla extract, you don't necessarily have to, as a consumer, mess with the vanilla beans. You take vanilla beans, you take alcohol, you mix them together, take that juice after it's been filtered out, you know, recover some of that alcohol, and what you're left with is the essence of vanilla, right? And that's what this would have gone, that's what, in terms of the first Western medicine types of products, that's what you would have been looking at is alcohol extractions and those being administered to people in sort of a tincture form to be able to see what could be done with that. And in that sense, kind of neat, you know, opportunities for exploring it as treatments and as a medicine. I can tell you that even alcohol tinctures for cannabis still exist in more or less the same form today.
Or they actually infuse the cannabis into the alcohol?
More so, you're able to make an extraction from the cannabis plant into the alcohol, and in that extraction, you could say that's, you know, as you're able to solubilize the cannabinoids and some of the other useful compounds, you were ultimately able to take out of the plant. That solution would have had what you were looking for. That would have had the good stuff.
This is off the topic, but I remember my dad and I, we went to Peru, Argentina, Brazil, a guy's trip, and we were in Cuzco, which is a very tall, high altitude area of Peru. And at the airport there, we had, they were serving coca tea, which was tea with the coca plant soaking in the tea. And it kind of gave you like kind of a tingliness in the mouth. I remember it was kind of like a numbness sensation.
I've had coca tea before. It's not the worst stuff out there.
Yeah, it's not. But yeah, it felt good. But I guess it's, you know, we use it for altitude sickness, and I want to get into the medical uses, but
and if I may, doctor, I mean, yet another extraction, that being a water extraction, right? We're extracting some of the water soluble chemicals out of, in this case, just another plant, and you're able to ingest that. And if you think about the idea of making an extraction from the plant, so you're not just enjoying it, only limited to enjoying it as the raw plant, but as something taken from that, cannabis works very much in the same way.
I want to get into the medical use of it, but before that, I want you to speak towards the idea that the highest quality cannabis is the highest THC level. So if you can maybe speak towards the question of quality. Is that a myth, or what do you see from your perspective?
The question of quality with cannabis is something broad. The question of quality for, say, your favorite wine or your favorite beer might extend beyond just simple chemical readings. You know, if you look at the alcohol by volume of your favorite wine, is it the alcohol of a Cabernet Sauvignon, of a Pinot Noir, White Zinfandel? What is it? And these things will absolutely change. Chemically speaking, things change in every large categorical genetic, you know, the genetics of the grapes that go into it. In any large categorical genetic shift, you'll end up seeing a fairly good chemical representation or a shift from one to the other. Now, cannabis works the same way. There's multiple varieties of cannabis. If you were looking for just the variety of cannabis that had the highest THC, that might be like looking for the type of beer that had the highest alcohol content. You might be stuck with porters and stouts and stuff like that. And that's not really going to give you that much experience in the world of beer. Hell, you might even say that if that's all you knew, you might not think that beer was that good. I mean, sure, porters and stouts are neat, but personally, I love the variation of things.
Right, not everyday beer.
I find the notion of having a favorite alongside the notion of having variety. I mean, ask me what my favorite food is, but before you do that, ask me if we're talking about dinner or breakfast, because I promise you it's going to vastly change. And I have yet to had eggs Benedict. No matter how much I love it at breakfast time, that's not my go-to for my end of the day dinner meal, right? So in this case, different varieties of cannabis will provide different conditions and different elements of enjoyment that could be something that you favor at different times of your day. I promise you that there's different cannabis that you'll enjoy more so if you're looking to be in a high energy state and get stuff done.
That would be the indica, more the indica versus sativa.
You might say more of a sativa, because it won't bog you down as much. And in the world of what we call sativas, that's often ones that'll give you a little bit more energy, maybe aid in creativity. Those would be the things if you're trying to move your day along, if it's early on, and you're looking for additional levels of enjoyment, wellness, therapy, anything in that range, you have the opportunity to engage in strains of cannabis and consume strains of cannabis that'll give you feelings that I should back up, that the high can be contextualized in a way that works with how you feel. At the same time or in the same breath, I could say that at the end of that same day, maybe you're stressed out, maybe people have asked a lot of you and you're just looking to sort of shut your brain down and relax and assure that you can drift off to sleep in a peaceful state. And that's where oftentimes you'll hear the word indica and some of those strains that have these more sedative qualities to it, and that's what you might be looking for in your cannabis. In these cases, what you find to be high quality, what your favorite thing about them, just like breakfast versus dinner, it's going to change. And in these cases, you're also going to find vastly different chemical quantities. And one might be high THC and one might not be. But if I was suggesting that you should determine what one should be consuming based on the THC content alone, I'd politely let them know they're doing it wrong.
Okay, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if I like the comparison between beer and wine, because if my wife were here, she'd love to talk wine because, you know, she's a wine person. And we, for our 30th anniversary a couple of years, we went to Paso Robles and brought home like 20 some bottles of wine. So amazing wine quality.
Sounds like a good time, man. Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I like that, the San Ysidro area, and all of that's awesome.
And I'm a beer guy, and so I know exactly what you mean. But my favorite beer is a higher alcohol, but it's not a stout, and it's from Belgium. It's a over 500-year recipe from the monks in Belgium, and so that's my number one favorite beer. I have a bar in my backyard, and so I have a kegerator. So I'm very much into beer quality. So. Nice. But there's lower quality beers, there's higher quality beers, and the same thing I think in the cannabis world, it looks like. But
there's cannabis beers out there.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's something that we can actually go a little further into. But people have in some of their beer brewing utilized the volatile profile of cannabis, oftentimes called the terpenes. Although I mentioned some chemicals earlier in our discussions, there are ketones, there are esters, there are flavonoids. Some of these same volatile flavor-causing chemicals you've come to know and love, and anything else from tea to vegetables to your beer, some of these same chemicals are inside of cannabis and communicate very well. And you could suggest that in the manufacture of one of these, you know, utilizing something else, the same way that you've seen in late stage brewing, things like strawberry used or lemon peel used or anything like that. People have utilized parts of the cannabis, oftentimes extractions, but parts of the cannabis plant to help, you know, add characterization and body to their product. We'll see more and more of this too, I think. It's just, you know, an ever-evolving world that, I mean, the first half of my life, none of this stuff really existed to be able to enjoy or experiment with in some of these fashions.
Probably, I'm assuming a lot, like in wine, the region you grow the grapes and all that is hugely important. I'm sure that's probably true with cannabis. I mean, I know it's probably cannabis is a weed. Probably you can grow it anywhere. But is there better places of growing because of the climate, the temperature, you know, whatever, water? I mean, is there certain like places that you can grow more quality or?
Yeah, good question. There are certain places where agriculturally, there are benefits to growing certain products there. The same reason why wine grapes grow really well in California. The little bit of a wetter start to the season, dry finishing. Some of those qualities also favor cannabis. And in these senses, you're looking at for some of these high-end products, especially it's what most people are aiming for when you think of something, at least in these aforementioned areas, what you end up looking at is the conditions of what oftentimes for the products you might refer to at an industry level as good things in, make good things out. You don't make good wine without good grapes. Right. You don't make good cannabis products without good cannabis. Right. And there are certain areas that will favor cannabis growth in certain ways. And although I don't believe there's enough research done in this, you could even say, I'm pretty sure with a fair amount of accuracy, that you'll even find different strains of cannabis growing better in certain climates. Long term, it wouldn't shock me the same way as you see all sorts of climates out there making wine, but usually they stick to only a couple of varietals of grapes, right? They don't actually really expand as much as you might see Napa or another area like Paso Robles, where they're able to grow a much more robust variety in terms of genetics of grapes to where they can make more things. California works like that in a lot of big ways, but I do believe that the same way as if you go to Oregon, you'll see certain grapes, certain types of grapes focused on. And if you go to Michigan, you'll see other ones focused on. I believe that you will one day, with a developed industry, see that level of optimization happening. It's just we're not there yet, in my opinion.
I know that's certainly true with tobacco too. Obviously, certain places you can grow it. I'm a cigar guy. I love cigars. I like cigars. I don't smoke a lot of them, but and I didn't for a while. But I started to, because I got myself a box of Cubans for Father's Day. Romeo and Julieta Cuban cigars. And it's like the Cuban cigars are just way a step above any other cigar, and it has to do with the temperate climate and the where the tobacco was grown there. And but I'm telling you, it's amazing the difference in quality,
how it's handled, the temperature in the room where things are being put together. Oftentimes is specific. When you have a high quality product, the levels and layers that you'll go to be able to use the word optimize. So we'll keep with that to make sure your process in producing and in production of it, and as it's stored, everything is as optimized as possible to create a lot of those flavor compounds and leave them intact. Now, in the whole THC example, what's kind of a fun way to go is that if let's say you've tried all sorts of cigars out there, the cigar you've enjoyed the most probably didn't have the highest nicotine content, right? Just like your favorite coffee probably didn't have the highest caffeine content, and your favorite dessert ever maybe didn't have the highest sugar content. It's these other chemicals, which ironically, the more robust of a flavor profile something has, the more it tunes down these other chemicals. It's just like a high-end wine. The more robust of a flavor profile it has, the less room there is for alcohol content. It's actually down and lower, in the same way as nobody would look at something like Everclear and say, well, this is a high-end beverage. You know what high-end tastes like, and it doesn't taste like rocket fuel. And in the same sense, you don't need any type of product that is measuring itself purely on a single chemical category. It's really not a good way of looking at things. It's almost cheating yourself, because you're only letting yourself see product in one dimension, rather than how many different things, hypothetically speaking, could you tell me about cigars and what you look for, and different elements that make different flavors and different things that you can translate from the quality of the product into the experience you have. And then how terrible would it be if you only just had one thing to choose from, that just had one chemical composition or one chemical property. And that's what we see with cannabis when people say THC and talk about it like it's something to be celebrated, instead of something that's just part of the plant and it's there. Just like wine is not the reason you're drinking wine, or alcohol isn't the reason you're drinking wine, and nicotine isn't the reason you smoke a cigar. They just happen to be there along for the ride. What you get is the experience.
Once you've got a Cuban, you can't go back. So I'm just tempted to anything else in my humidor just to toss it, because after you've had a Cuban,
it's just going to get older and older, man.
It's not going
to get any better than it is now. Like right now is the best it's going to get.
And when you mentioned Everclear, the only time I've had Everclear, which is really good, is at Pat O'Brien's, the Hurricane drink in Bourbon Street in New Orleans. That's how That's what they make a hurricane out of, and it's a bunch of all fruit juice, and you don't even drink, you don't even taste the alcohol. But that's
well, at the same time though, that's analogous to cannabis, because there are products out there where you have a cannabis oil, usually referred to as distilled cannabis. It's heavily rendered, just like the petroleum that goes in your car has been heavily rendered into a universal form that can work in just about any, combustion engine, right? So in that same sense, people have figured out how to render cannabis into this form, and it's called distilled cannabis. In the industry, we call it distillate. And if you want to sound like a cool guy, you call it disty, because that's like your friend, right? And so disty or distillate has been manufactured or rendered or mixed, blended, formulated into numerous types of products out there. In many cases, ones that kind of kill that hashy flavor, and instead maybe it tastes like bubble gum or blueberries or blueberry bubble gum or on and on. There's a few brands, and if you've heard of some of these mega brands that exist in multiple states for like things like vape pens and stuff like that, there's a very good chance that that's part of how they maintain their recipe. They have this one, for the most part, singular ingredient that's basically cannabis oil, and they flavor it. And you can actually even take the same cannabis oil in the same way that you can render gasoline into this fully expressed version of, render petroleum into this fully expressed version that we call gasoline that goes in our cars. Anyone anywhere can essentially render cannabis into this fully rendered version that we call distillate, and then take the same flavors that you might add anywhere, because flavors, unlike cannabis, so it's allowed to pass state lines, and you can send flavors around, and all of a sudden you have very similar grades of product that are in a sort of a mass manufactured sense that can exist virtually anywhere. And this isn't something that belongs just to cannabis. If you take the cheapest orange juice company that exists out there, there's no fresh squeezed oranges in there. There's so many parts orange extract, and so many parts simple sugar, and so many parts orange coloring and spring water. And at a certain point, we call that blend orange juice, and it's never going to be as good as that fresh squeezed stuff. And at this point, the kind of my sort of logical arc that I'm on right here is to kind of separate and distinguish what you consider to be a high-end product versus sort of an everyday commercialized product. You can look at something like a cheaper type of whiskey, and you can add a bunch of cinnamon to it. And I don't want to, call out any name, but call it Ball of Fire, right? Because if you take a bunch of some relatively crappy whiskey and you throw a bunch of cinnamon at it, all you're really going to do is taste cinnamon flavored whiskey. It's not going to be a great product. And if somebody knows real whiskey and how it's supposed to taste, that's the opposite end of the spectrum. That's just swill right there, right? You can actually see this across almost any kind of product, how it can be formulated into a certain version and how it can be enjoyed. And now you oftentimes, if you understand what you're looking for in the market, you as a consumer can choose one direction versus another. Do you want that small batch, high-end, may never even taste that specific flavor again because it's so specific and so small batch? Do you want that cigar? Of flippin' course you do, right? Versus a mass manufactured one that you couldn't care less about because to you that's swill. You could say the same thing about types of wine and mass manufactured wine in a box, or small amounts of wine that, actually got pressed out of a very, very specific years worth of grapes that, led to this phenomenal product. You could say that about beer, and ones that come from a high-end hops product, or ones that are somewhat more kettle produced, and just ones that are mixed essentially as a formula with so many parts of fresh spring water and so many parts of hops and barley flavor. That is really one of the big distinguishing elements of how a lot of products work. You see that with cannabis as well. You see versions of, say, of extracts that work to be single source, and versions that are an expression, very specific expression of that batch of product. So that batch of cannabis that grew, and an extract into that form. And some extractions get turned into that mass manufactured form. Some work better for people and some don't. In some cases, some people will try something like a vape pen and think, oh, this tastes kind of like crap and it doesn't make me feel great. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, they later have a chance to try a vape pen that's from a single source. Now we're getting to something like the very best cigar equivalent that you've had. Mm-hmm. And you get to that single source product and they'll have it and they'll realize that percentage-wise, it's got a third less cannabinoids in it because it's got so many more flavors because it's a natural product and something that hasn't been heavily rendered, a process which strips out flavor, right? It hasn't been heavily rendered. It really is that intact expression of cannabis. And somebody may have a completely different experience with this. How do I know? It's exactly how I am. I really enjoy small batch products. I enjoy good expressions of natural expressions of cannabis. And personally, I abhor things like flavored whiskey and I don't like my cannabis to be flavored. I want something that in its most basic condition was grown or produced beautifully, just to go back to our original point. And I want something that's grown or produced beautifully for me to get the most accurate, honest, least rendered expression of it as possible. And to me, that's what can make a high-end product.
I have to say the best beer that I've ever had in my life is the Triple Carmelite from Belgium. A triple beer, amazing. Anyway,
I like Belgian beers too. I'm a big fan of sours. If you've ever had sour beers and other aged beers, not only sours, Belgian does them really well. Last time I was there, I went happy, man. That was a fun place.
So speaking about medical uses, I know there's some controversy, of course, but I mean, I know there's some pretty well documented medical uses like epilepsy, people with cancer getting chemotherapy, that the cannabis can really help with their appetite because the tendency is to lose weight. All the way to what I do, anxiety, depression. There was a woman I saw, and I'd seen her for years. And I'm a big believer that, I'm a huge believer in psychotropic medications. I think they work amazingly well. So I usually always go towards them first because I know how well they work. And I'm trying to get to the chemical part of the problem and fix the chemical part. In the nervous system. But anyway, I had seen her, I had her on a combination of medication. She was doing a lot better than she used to. But still, I just wasn't getting her there. I wasn't getting her to where we call remission, meaning completely well. She still had anxiety. She's still depressed. But anyways, I pretty much ran out of ideas. Okay. And I didn't see her for a little while. So I thought, maybe she went off her medications again. Maybe she saw someone else. She came back to see me, and she was like a different person. She was smiling. I was just like, you look, I'm not going to say her name, but I said, God, what's going on with you? You look great. She's like, okay, don't be mad at me. I go, what do you mean, mad at you about what? She goes, okay, I'm occasionally smoking some marijuana, and I go, and I said, is that working for you? She goes, oh my gosh. She said, Dr. Corona, I'm like a new person. And I said, but I said, I don't want you to be mad at me. I go, mad at you? And no, I said, the fact that you're feeling better, that makes me happy. I told her, hey, if that works for you, I certainly didn't have all the answers. I ran out of ideas, and so. And, she had tried ketamine, and I know ketamine does work for some people. She was thinking about psilocybin. I know that works for some people. But it was a pretty dramatic, and we also see, a lot of it for sleep, for, insomnia can help. But I know there's definitely medical uses for it. I hope you enjoyed the show today. If you have issues with mental health, or if you know someone who needs help, I'm available. If you want to contact my office, my website is drpaulcoronamd.com. That's DR for doctor. And you can also learn more about me on my website. My phone number, if you want to contact my office directly, is 949-481-0118. If you want to learn more about my methods and what I do, my latest book, I recommend The Corona Protocol, a scientifically proven medical solution to stop addiction, bullying, homelessness, school shootings, and suicide, 30 years in the making. In this book, I tell 30 original short stories about people. And I also have my first 3 books, Healing the Mind and Body, the trilogy, available online. I look forward to you joining me again on the next episode of the Dr. Paul Show. Can you speak towards that of your knowledge of medical uses, and also if you can get into another extremely popular is CBD, and can you talk about medical uses of THC and then also CBD and the role that plays? And I know that's kind of a whole new revolution.
Something just real briefly to sort of in a slow segue to me and this topic. Something I find very interesting in terms of cannabis isn't just how it makes you feel. It's and this is something maybe you can comment more so on, but it's the accessibility. We even had mentioned accessibility briefly in a previous conversation, but the accessibility to being able to feel better. Like, this is something that exists as a tangible element in this woman's life that she's able to engage. She knows how it works, and generally most, assuming she was smoking it, you feel those effects relatively instantly, which means she's able to self-titrate as well and get just to that certain perfect point of feeling. And I'm not sure if you cover titration.
She told me she does not that much. She said just a little bit is all it takes.
To me, is so powerful that somebody has that ability to feel better. I mean, it's on one hand, it's unfortunately in some lights could sound like chemical dependency. And I say that as somebody who very much engages in the same type of feel and arc themselves. In another way, it feels so empowering and so healthy to simply hold the key to taking a state of mind that you're in and helping yourself feel better in a predictable, generally safe way. It's one of my favorite things about cannabis. So just, in that thought, and I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts, this is more, I think, your field than mine, but that's, to me, is one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. And it's, and again, I know this is controversial. I get it, because some people, might say, well, you're advocating this, but the way I look at it is this, I'm kind of like libertarian, in my leanings. And I believe that, we'll get into the legality of everything, but, it's like impossible to stop its use. Okay. It's something people can grow in their backyards. Okay. So it's a weed. Okay. So, how are you going to control it? You can't. People are going to get it no matter what, and so in my view, if that being the case, that's just our reality. Why not learn more about it, be safe about it? But can things be abused? Sure. I think anything can be abusable. The same thing goes with coffee. Same thing goes with, alcohol, obviously, with a lot of things.
There's an offset there too. Every so often I'll drink maybe more coffee than I ought to, but maybe I need to be a little bit busier. And if I use cannabis almost as the opposite of coffee, that's, me cooling down the engine. Maybe I have the ability to take on a little bit more and get a little extra stressed in that day, not without, actual wellness out of mind, but with the notion that I can actually pull myself back from what might be an anxious state. It's, again, powerful.
Yeah. So tell me about CBD. What's that about? And I know, what my basic understanding is you're taking the part of the plant, or you're extracting the part that doesn't have the part that gives, not the non-psychoactive part of the plant.
It's not as selective as that. And I'm not quite sure, Doctor, if that's exactly before I,
I don't really know much about it. I'm asking.
It's the ability to extract CBD. Happens alongside the ability to extract the other cannabinoids within the plant. There are products, namely hemp, that produces little to no THC. There are products that are out there in the markets that are more or less complete CBD products. They are hemp-based products, and these CBD products don't have a very robust cannabinoid profile, but they do have CBD. And legally speaking, and from people's perception of what's safe versus not safe, CBD has a pretty good rap. With that much said, though, I would, and a lot of others in the industry would want to point out something that's oftentimes referred to as the ensemble effect. It used to be referred to as the entourage effect, sometimes still is. But the notion that there's more than, and it's a notion of the ensemble effect in terms of that description or term difference, then entourage effect is intended to take some of the attention away from who's usually the main star, which is THC. And the ensemble effect suggests that it's not even an entourage with one leader and everybody else, following as a family, that realistically there's just a whole family of cannabinoids, different ratios of them, different amounts, and so on and so forth will help yield different effects. You could even go to the point of, and I'll zoom in on CBD in a moment, but you could even get to the point where you could suggest that there are different ailments that there are different ailments that cannabis, rather, are very good at treating. And depending on your selection of cannabinoids and your ROA, your route of administration for these cannabinoids, be it something oral, topical, smoked, and so on and so forth, you actually have some really good ability with working cannabis in terms of a means of treatment. With working cannabis as something that can actually target certain parts of the body using certain cannabinoids, which is a really cool thing, because if you consider the abilities of cannabis, there are different things you would say about THC and CBD. From a compounding pharmaceutical standpoint, you could even go as far as to say that depending on somebody's ailment, if they need more pain relief, THC, versus more of an anti-inflammatory response, which would be CBD, you could even, to that patient, from a compounding perspective, vary the amounts you'd be giving them. For somebody like me who has got a reasonable tolerance to THC, but is also aging and things hurt, a 1-to-1 ratio for somebody like me might do really good to both help me with anxieties as well as the general pains of working out and aging and things like that. You could say that somebody who's less sensitive to, you could say somebody who's more sensitive to cannabis as a whole, or to THC, diminished amounts of THC. Whereas smaller amounts of THC might be enough to create a disassociation type effect and help get them out of pain while simultaneously helping treat them for, say, something inflammation-based, again, CBD. We could discuss this both from the perspective of something internal, or is this something topical where we are trying to combat both something inflamed and in pain on the exterior. There's so much we can say about cannabis and CBD and what you can do with it, in fact, that there are, in my opinion, recipe books that could be written based on somebody's potential access to a smorgasbord of various cannabinoids and the ability to mix these into products, be it a tincture, topical, something to be taken internally like an edible, smokable product, vapable product. It goes on and on and on. So what can we say about this? And of course, let me know, but let me answer your question. CBD, is it a viable means of, is it a good treatment? And it can be. It's conditional. And what I'd say are there certain conditions out there that respond very favorably to CBD. I can also say that in most cases, CBD-focused treatments are much, much more effective with a certain amount of THC present. In fact, it's very, very common when talking about CBD-focused, CBD-rich products to be referring to them within a ratio, something like a 1-to-1. If you see that, odds are it's discussing a THC CBD similarly dosed product, or a 2-to-1, which oftentimes will be twice as much CBD as THC. Epilepsy patients, for instance, oftentimes are going to be sticking to amounts closer to 20-to-1 CBD to THC.
So CBD 20 to THC 1?
Yep. So, for example, the plant itself may grow 10% CBD and 0.5% THC.
Oh. Interesting. Yeah. So that's right. So CBD comes from hemp.
No, it comes from cannabis in general, even working within what we would consider to be the regulatory structure of this state. You very often will have a plant that in the plant's makeup will be, the ability to produce both THC and CBD. In that ratio that I mentioned, sometimes is associated with a strain, and that strain is known to produce a certain ratio of CBD and THC. You can say that hemp, as you mentioned, generally speaking, has extremely low amounts of THC. However, the notion of CBD only coming from hemp isn't accurate. CBD could come from any cannabis, and what we consider to be very, very low THC, easy to trade across state or national borders style hemp is the plant itself. Its makeup, its genetics are quite a bit different. That's a low THC producing genetic versus oftentimes what I see working in a laboratory, BelCosta Labs, versus what I tend to see is oftentimes high THC. And if there's CBD, it's usually expressed through that ratio. It's a CBD THC product. So
it's not the case that CBD is a therapeutic part and the THC isn't, so because they each have their own specific therapeutic.
You would suggest that the dynamic between the two of them is much more significant than isolating each chemical is what it would do. For instance, THC is seen as a psychoactive inebriating chemical. CBD is seen as often anti-psychoactive and something that'll actually straighten out a psychoactive response. So what you end up having is with a THC CBD combined product, a diminished high, which is an actual function of the product. It's not meant to get you high while still giving you the benefits of consuming cannabis.
Legality. So the legality of the product. I know it's like certain states. Yes. I mean, I know the federal government still has a Schedule 1. I'm not sure if that's going to ever change. It's very slow. Things are slow to change.
Yeah, we'll see.
But I know certain states, but like I said, I mean, I'm not advocating the use. I just want people to understand that I'm not saying, I wanted Nate to come in because I just wanted to learn more about this. And I have seen, and like I said, with certain patients, definitely some therapeutic benefits. But like I said, I think it's very difficult when you make something illegal, like they used, like the prohibition back when with alcohol, it doesn't work. When you try to make something illegal, people will get it. If you don't get it from a reputable shop, you're going to get it from your local dealer. And so there, it's almost like what in my libertarian brain, what's the point of making it illegal? Because it's really useless. So what can you say about what's going on in a legal sense?
I've been in the industry for about 25 years. I've seen it change many different forms in that sense. Legally speaking, I have maybe a different perspective, and it probably has to do with that I'm just at that age where, I'm in mid-40s at this point. So late teens is when I figured out cannabis was awesome and have worked in it for the most part professionally since then. I've seen difficulty in those first difficulty and setbacks in those first, 0 through 18 years or so, enough so that the last 5 to 7 years, let's say 7 years or so of the industry, have been almost shocking in its degree of development and acceptance. Something flipped the switch right around 2016 through 2018, where it went from demonized to, hey, how can I get into that? I, of course, was a part of it, and fortunately for me, I always think that, ironies in the world are something worth stating just because, how did that happen? And me engaging in something long before it was nearly as accepted and legal is part of the same idea of why I'm good at it. And the fact that I have a career right now is because I engaged in something illegal for so long and got good at it. You know what I mean? And by the time that everything actually turned around and became accepted, go figure, I went from somebody who was climbing, up a mountain with no end in sight to apparently close to the top of it. And it's like, how the hell did I get here?
Through 16 to 18, I wonder if that had anything to do with deregulation at the time, maybe, or?
It very much was leading up to that point for years and years. And what you ended up seeing is what you ended up seeing was generally people looking at this as a means to be able to make money, and you saw more investment in it and people willing to invest in it than ever before. It's not to say there was a lack of investment in the previous years, but it seemed to mostly be cannabis people who were reinvesting in it. There's a lot of fresh people with fresh, money and ideas and everything else they wanted to project at this new, and they're then beginning to burgeon industry, and this was some of the effects. I think since then the spell has worn off, and although cannabis is still headed in the same, going to be legal someday soon type trajectory that set it on, I do think that legality-wise, from the perspective of the last 4 years, and I know it's not a perfect example of what happens if you get pulled over with cannabis in X state. I mean, if you're in Idaho, you're probably still pretty screwed, right? Mm-hmm. But if you were to look at things how they were 10 years ago versus now, it's night and day. 10 years ago, demonized, one would have to not only justify themselves to landlords and banks, but to their own family, whereas I am now. Businesses have wide open arms oftentimes in trying to work with cannabis, often because too there's extra financial incentives that a lot of these companies see in trying to work with cannabis. Whether or not the cannabis guys have the money is a different statement, but the idea of it being wide open arms at this point and something that's generally accepted. I just traveled the United States, and I was not a stranger then either of what I do when I ran into strangers. And for the most part, everybody loves it. Nobody's really seen something against cannabis, which I'm not going to lie, when I was in my late teens, and I had some weed on me, it felt like I was, just a few steps away from getting a ticket and having to show up in court. So it's very, very different in terms of how it's felt. And it's partially because I've been at it for so long, and I'm seeing what looks like an arc that's going perfectly towards legalization, and me being who I'm allowed to be, me being able to exercise who I am. Personally, I like the idea of cannabis tourism. I like the idea of it being acceptable for that whole industry to really rise. And I like the idea of, from a selfish perspective, me going and visiting certain parts of this earth that I would love to see and being high while I do it.
Share with us again in closing. Do you have anything else to add? Or
so much more to add, Doctor. We should do this again.
I might have you back.
I am happy to add as much as I can. There are so many things to consider about this awesome plant, and the fact that it's ingrained into our history, according to some. It is even our ability to consume cannabis and see the down regulation of cannabinoid receptors in the body is considered to be a survival trait. And if that's right, that means it's literally written into us, encoded into us, the ability to take cannabis, consume cannabis, and it not impact our ability to survive. And it's a hell of a plan. And I feel very, very lucky that I came in at the right point of history to be able to study and work with it. So
tell the audience again the name of your lab.
My name is Nate Winnakur. I'm one of the founders and vice president of BelCosta Labs, which is a cannabis...
BelCosta?
BelCosta, they're right there. BelCosta Labs.
Okay.
Which is a cannabis testing lab. The cannabis testing lab perspective, having done that for well over a dozen years, almost 15 years, has given me an amazing view at cannabis, not just how the plant works chemically and to some slight degrees in working with some patients out there physiologically, but also in terms of the appreciation for just how much it does. And I mean, it's ultimately given me a life and a career and helped make people around me healthier and better. So I wouldn't have it any other way. I also am starting up another project. I am one of the, as near as I can tell, leading cannabis educators out there. And I'm starting up an online project called Teaching Bud. Wow. And it should be pretty easy to find.
Teaching Bud, I like that. Yeah, I like
Teaching
that.
Bud.
I love that.
So that's what I do. And hopefully my future is full of opportunities to share and educate on the plant and all of that good stuff.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it, and I might have to come back again, because we could keep talking about this probably for a while longer.
Yeah. Let me know what you guys think. I'm really stoked to have been here. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Doctor. Yeah. So I did have a couple of questions from around the room with regards to cannabis and how it works. One of the questions, the first one was indica versus sativa, and more specifically, how indicas affect some people, how sativas affect some people, to that degree, right? Right. So where we're at with that. Sativa and indica, technically mainly morphological traits in the plant. They describe how it grows. Now, I say that because although sativa is associated with waking you up and indica is associated with putting you down, putting you to sleep, there is a lot more nuance and complexity to those besides that. It's not like trucker pills where one wakes you up and the other one puts you down. In this sense, there's a lot more to it than that. There are plants that grow like sativas that feel like indicas. There are versions of sativa that may have you feeling energetic and like you almost can't sit still, virtually caffeine and cannabis form. Whilst there are other types of sativa, or what you consider to be sativa, that may just kind of be comfortable while you're active and might sort of just taste good. And it's just something that helped put you in a happy mood as you go forward. And it was just a small part of a larger experience. At the same time, indica isn't necessarily something that's referring to something that'll put you to sleep. There's vastly different strains and that fall into the indica category, and even chemical variations within those strains. Some of them really do put you to sleep and don't have too much character to them. They're, essentially very just sleepy types of herb. Other types are very chilling and calming, which won't necessarily put you to sleep, but give you the opportunity to still carry through maybe a more anxiety-ridden part of your day. On top of that, you have formulated products that may even be meeting descriptions of both of these. And in a lot of cases, even some of your favorite herbs might fall into that hybrid category where you really do get a mixed bag of various feelings. It's neither something that wakes you up or puts you to sleep. In some cases, it's just fun and it's an enjoyable high. In that sense, I would say that everybody's a little bit different. And generally speaking, what you end up getting with something unique, and this is where I find some of the more interesting sides, but often what they'll refer to as exotic strains, or ones that are a little bit more unique, have a different chemical profile than what you're used to taking. Often those will be the ones that are most profound and different. Even if you are smoking high THC cannabis all the time, having access to an exotic strain or consuming an exotic strain, even if it's lower THC, may absolutely knock your socks off and give you a type of high that you might have been chasing for years, trying to find something that was simultaneously fun, yet sedative, yet had qualities to it where the high seemed to change at certain points. These can be features of cannabis, and when you see people expressing that they enjoy it and are having fun with it, sometimes it's multiple aspects. Hell, sometimes I'll start with an appetizer and end with dinner, and sometimes I'll start with a sativa and end with an indica. It's just, it falls into those, just kind of different and respective categories in terms of something I might have some fun and keeps me awake versus something I might smoke at the end of the night and go to sleep. And you had a couple of questions.
I was just wondering if you could give some specific combinations for symptoms that I think most older adults are dealing with, such as sleep, anxiety, more energy, and pain, specifically pain.
So can I suggest some solutions that may come from cannabis that may apply to individuals that don't have maybe a crazy high tolerance to cannabis or super familiar with it, that provides relief from anxiety and pain, stuff like that, right?
Correct.
Cool. Yeah, there's a lot that you can say, and there are a lot of different products that might meet these conditions. In my opinion, some of the most common introductory products to cannabis are going to be topicals. So if we're talking about somebody being in pain, a topical product might be a really good way of looking at or being introduced to cannabis.
You mean rubbing it right into the area, I mean?
Yeah, just a topical external treatment into the skin rendered by cannabis. So a good example would be a pain cream. And the pain could come in a couple of different forms. I've mentioned pain relief through THC and anti-inflammation through CBD, which is a bit more complex than that. But if you were looking at products, say in a dispensary that were formulated, and you found equal parts THC and CBD, you would, in my opinion, correctly surmise that the active ingredients are putting equal amounts of importance to pain reduction and to anti-inflammation. In this sense, let's say if the pain is something external, let's say it's knee pain, wrist pain, anything arthritically related, any of that, you could suggest there being a version of external treatment that exists in cannabis. If it's more on the pain level and less in the inflammation level, something higher in THC may be appropriate. If it's the opposite, something that's high that requires anti-inflammation and anti-inflammation treatment, something that's high in a version of THC called THCA. Or THCA and CBD combined. These products exist and would be something that you'd consider to be much more related to an anti-inflammation type treatment. Pain can come from inflammation as well. So there are layers of description I could give to this, to where you might be attacking a problem that essentially exists in a compound way, and you can do that through a combination of chemicals. With the opportunity to look at other versions of cannabis, again, I have, in my opinion, the two closest ways to introduce cannabis in a comfortable way are through vape pens. I prefer, ones that are much more of a single source, high end, sometimes a bit pricier too in that sense. But vape pens, namely because you can titrate, which means you can take just enough medicine. Well, you can self-titrate, which means you can take just enough to where you're feeling good, and you can do so through a pretty specific, even easy to measure way. And that, to me, is a really good way to be introduced to cannabis as well, because it is something much closer to what I would consider to be a medical delivery type of approach. In that sense, I would consider something that you may inhale, or something in terms of an edible that you might eat, to be something of an internal approach, whereas something topical would be an external approach. For what you're asking for, I would suggest both. If we're talking about pain, let's say it's something you can feel externally, I'd like to deal with it externally. For something like anxiety, probably, unless, part of your body is hurting so bad that that's what's causing the anxiety, it's probably accurate to say that there is a combination you should go for outside of maybe just looking at topical, or even something that's usually perceived as safer, like just looking at CBD. What I would recommend is low dosage and working with generally non-psychoactive or less inebriating versions of cannabis. Things not necessarily devoid of THC, but CBD rich, and high amounts of CBD alongside THC would be the kind of products that I'd recommend trying out. Small metered amounts and going from there. High THC products are great for pain as well, especially edibles, but that's a slippery slope. There are plenty of people and plenty of stories out there of people who took high THC product and thought they were losing their mind. Odds are they're going to be okay, but in the moment, it probably seemed like the scariest thing ever. I would want to help somebody avoid that. And what I would tell them if it was their first time trying something, whether it be cannabis or alcohol, I'm not going to pour them a party bowl size shot. I'm going to give them just a little taster. And I would recommend anybody either smoking for the first time or taking edibles for the first time to try that taster, establish where a level of comfort is, and go from there. The idea of titration, although in a much more traditional sense, where the idea of titration might exist in a format where, please correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, but where you maybe take a certain amount as your dosage for week 1 and then take an additional amount as your dosage for week 2, week 3, even more, and so on and so forth until you reach that comfortable level that you're also comfortable with. You can say that that can exist in a fairly structured format if you're attempting cannabis edibles. You can also buy a little bit more ability to handle it by taking it right before you go to bed. I can assure you that if you are taking an appropriate amount, you'll sleep amazingly, and unbroken sleep and being able to rest through injury is arguably some of the best way to be able to take cannabis as a means of therapy and feeling better.
Can you speak to what you would recommend for energy? As I get older, my energy is getting a bit depleted.
Can I speak to what we could do about waning energy? Agreed. And did you have something too, doctor?
Well, I just thought what you were just talking about. I think one risk I've seen is psychosis. If the person has bipolar disease or disorder, or especially bipolar 1, that there's some risk of psychosis. And the question would be, like, let's say with a younger person who gets psychotic, is the person possibly bipolar already, just kind of uncovering that mania, or could it be causing? I'm not sure. I buy this because I think the bipolar disorder is genetic, and but that is, I think, one potential risk is the potential psychosis. And
that makes sense. And I think there are conditions that can lead to that. I remember there's been numerous studies done over the years, especially considering a fairly high rate of people who have schizophrenia who also consume cannabis. And I remember at first it was a one begets the other kind of notion. But as it was looked into more and more studies were uncovered, it looked like simply that, for something like schizophrenia, which can come, potentially be triggered by so many different things and so many versions of imbalance that can ultimately lead to this, and so many different chemical cocktails that can be used to try to treat it with various levels of effectiveness. And then this sort of conditional, but also pretty broadside of a barn-esque type of treatment, which is cannabis. And you seeing now a very, very, I would say unnaturally large, but it actually is the opposite. It's naturally and logically large number of people who oftentimes are self-medicating because that's one of the best treatments available to them. And I do think you're right. It can absolutely trigger psychosis. At the same time, something that's associated with being a psychoactive chemical, THC, right? It doesn't make me strip off my clothes and run through the streets, right? Like, I actually could be happy or relaxed on it, which is for a psychoactive chemical and something that could have been associated as something psychoactive. Literally, the response it has on me and my wife and so many others is anti-psycho.
Right.
So that's
right, exactly.
It's so interesting. I mean, honestly, it's I think maybe the perfect realm of like how nobody knows, but somehow perfectly skirts the line between my professional, my career choice and yours. So really interesting stuff when you consider that. To your question, energy. What can you do with cannabis and the notion of as energy wanes? That was a question for me too, as I'm hitting that point in my life where I'm seeing all of these physiological changes, and what can I do? And some of the answers are more obvious than not. Go out, work out, hit the gym stuff. Other things are, what can you do that's healthy for you, and what areas can cannabis still have a part in this? I found that being able to get a full night's sleep just from cannabis edibles, and even being able to, after a stressful day and on the kind of day where I'll be staring at the ceiling for a couple of hours before I go to bed, smoking an appropriate amount before I go down does wonders for how I feel, just for my state of mind, for my mental health, for my energy and ability to cope with things on the following day. Night and day, more profound or powerful than virtually any drug I've ever taken is the effects that a night's sleep has on my body, right? Mm-hmm. In that sense, cannabis has been an amazing sleep aid, and when we're appropriately controlled, you won't really be feeling the next day. That would be, I think, to give you the best answer to that question, I think that's it. Others might suggest that something like a sativa type of product, one of the more energetic varietals of cannabis, would be a good way to go, and they wouldn't be wrong. It might not give you that crazy spurt of energy. It's certainly not going to be a second caffeine or something like that for you, but it does give you elements of an experience that aren't necessarily pulling you down, that can be seen as something that actually keep you going. Example, let's say you have an artistic aspect to your day or something you'd like to do. Cannabis will generally, the right strain that's not making you sleepier, if it is something that is generally energy or creativity inducing, which is not rare in the world of cannabis, you might actually find, again, I keep talking about experiences, and you might find a more robust experience in having smoked a little bit and done that. And to help create an example of how that exists, you know how there's like plenty of alcohol plus painting type of classes that are out there. Mm-hmm. There are, from what I can tell out there, just as many almost, depending on where you go, of get high and go paint, at mm-hmm. the same kind of session. And again, it's one makes people relaxed and more creative, and the other one makes, people relaxed and more creative. So that's how that would kind of look.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. If you have issues with mental health, or if you know someone who needs help, I'm available. If you want to contact my office, my website is drpaulcoronamd.com. That's DR for doctor. And you can also learn more about me on my website. My phone number, if you want to contact my office directly, is 949-481-0118. If you want to learn more about my methods and what I do, my latest book, I recommend The Corona Protocol, a scientifically proven medical solution to stop addiction, bullying, homelessness, school shootings, and suicide, 30 years in the making. In this book, I tell 30 original short stories about people. And I also have my first 3 books, Healing the Mind and Body, the trilogy, available online. I look forward to you joining me again on the next episode of The Dr. Paul Show.